The 46th Battalion, a particularly aggressive unit made up of Westerners from Moose Jaw and Regina, raided the Germans every time they moved into the line. But the Germans rarely raided, and when they did, the raids were small, sometimes very small. There is a comic opera flavor to the image of one German patrol, consisting of a lone and bewildered Bavarian seen stumbling about no man's land by three amused Canadian scouts, into whose waiting arms he eventually blundered. Because the trenches were as little as 35 yards apart, the Canadians were able to creep to the very rim of the enemy's defenses to report on the condition of his wire or the presence of new machine gun posts. The Germans fired flares and star shells in a vain attempt to seek them out, but every man had been trained to freeze into immobility when the flares exploded. As long as they didn't twitch, as long as they held their position, no matter how grotesque, and stayed that way until the flare faded, they were simply part of the moonscape. The raids were vicious because the weapons used, the Lewis gun and the Mills bomb, were vicious. The common image of the Great War soldier is that of a man in a steel helmet carrying a rifle and a bayonet. In reality, the helmet gave little protection, while the rifle and bayonet were all but obsolete. Few soldiers were well enough trained to fire the Lee Enfield with any accuracy. On the range, men lay on their bellies under perfect conditions and banged away at stationary targets. At Vimy, they blundered forward in the gloom, firing on the move at indistinct figures that popped up for a moment and then vanished. Too much oil in the barrel or a slight breeze could deflect the fire of the steadiest marksman. It's safe to say that most of the enemy killed or wounded by rifle bullets were killed by snipers using the Ross or were hit at close quarters in the hand-to-hand fighting that took place in the trenches. But even here, the rifle was an awkward weapon to handle in a narrow ditch full of struggling opponents. The bayonet only added to the problem. A man was just as likely to gash a friend as an enemy. There were few bayonet wounds among the men treated in the regimental aid post and the casualty clearing centers. As one British general put it, no man in the Great War was ever killed by a bayonet unless he had his hands up first. It was an excellent tool for opening bully beef tins, toasting bread, or prodding those who had already surrendered, but as an effective weapon, it was about as useful as a cutlass.